Okay, so today I want to talk a little bit about OAuth 2, and we spoke about it in my previous video. We really talked about basic authentication, and so we're going to talk about OAuth 2 today, but let's just recap what basic authentication is. As we have a guy called Viv over here, and you have a little back-end service over here, which you provide service with. In our case it was an employee dictionary or something to that effect. So every time Viv over here wants to do, wants to actually get to your resource, he has to send the username and password. Password. He has to send that in the header, and he gets access. So that's a very nice, simple world. So that's basic authentication. So there's, however, the world gets a little bit more complex than that. There's these modern things, and it's not really modern, but in any case, there's this, this guy Viv discovers this very wonderful site called VivBook, and he starts with his little digital camera over here. Viv starts uploading, taking pictures, and then manually uploading them to this VivBook site. But to log into VivBook, the site, of course, he needs to, authenticate himself first, and thus, he goes through this authentication type server. And so here's Viv over here. He logs to log into VivBook. He logs in there, and then he goes, has access to the back-end VivBook service. And then he can start uploading his little pictures. He took all sorts of things he took pictures of, and he uploads them over here. Very nice. So to do that, of course, he has to send username and password. He sends those details in, and he says, can I have access? And VivBook's Authorization Server over here authorizes him or authenticates him, and says, yep, I give you access, and you can go in and upload your pictures. So old Viv over here is very happy, and to do this, he of course uses his little PC or his phone or whatever. So there's Viv logging in with his username and password into VivBook's Authentication Server, gets access and uploads his pictures, and all his little friends over here can go look at these pictures, and they're very happy that they can also see their pictures, because they've also got accounts there. But but then along, and that's almost, that's the standard username and password, almost like basic, except it's not sent in a header and it's not a service. But we'll get to the service part a bit later. So now, Viv discovers this new site, and this new site's a very nice site, brand new, and it's called Viv Greens. So Viv Greens is a site where you can upload your photos to, and they will actually print them for you. It's a very nice service they provide. So you send them your photos, and they actually print them for you. So again, our friend Viv here uses a username and password combination to log in there, and then you upload your photos and you print them. So the problem with Viv is now, he puts his photos over here, but now he has to go and uploads his photos to these guys to actually print them. So now his photos are everywhere, and there's lots of them. And he's getting a little bit frustrated with this. He's saying, this is crazy. Every time I want to go print my photos, I have to take those same photos I already have here and I have to go upload them here. So he doesn't want to do that, and that's where OAuth really comes into play. So Viv Greens over here now brings out the app called the Viv Greens app, and maybe he runs that on his tablet or phone or something like that. I'll make it a little bit more modern, but there's his app, the Viv Greens app, and he's happy with this app, but of course he sits with the same problem. He has to take his photos, upload them to there, then this app will upload to send the photos there, but he needs a username and password combination. So even in the app world, that sucks, because again he has to take his photos and to upload them and print them. So he doesn't want to do that anymore. So now in comes the whole idea of OAuth. So what happens in this world is Viv is going to say his app is the Viv or the Viv Greens app is going to say, listen, Viv, do you want grant me access to your photos at VivBook? So Viv's going to say, yeah, I kind of like that. I'll give you that access. So then the app is going to redirect Viv to VivBook's auth service and say, Viv would like to grant us access to his photos. So this really, Viv logs in with his username and password like he normally does over here when he goes into VivBook. But this time there's going to be a little prompt that says, do you want to grant the Viv Greens app access to your photos? And he's going to say, yes, I would like that. There is then a return, and actually goes back to the app ultimately. A token is generated by the VivBook auth server, generates this token and sends it to the app. The app can then of course take that token, and let's call that the access token, and share it with the backend, its own backend. So it sends a token over there and says, here's Viv's token. So from that point onwards, whenever Viv tells the app, you know what, go print me some of my photos, or whether the app lives here or inside the site, the site approaches, Viv Greens approaches VivBook's auth server with the provided token that was generated and says, you know what, we have Viv over here that would like to see if he can get access to his photos, and we have already been pre-authenticated with a token. VivBook in turn says, oh, we know that token, we're okay with that token, and says, you're okay, you can have access to the service, and then ultimately, or to the resources, and ultimately then Viv's photos can be transferred to Viv Greens for printing. So now, Viv takes his photos, uploads them to VivBook like he normally does, but he doesn't have to now send them again to Viv Greens, because it can be uploaded, or Viv Greens can have access to his photos at VivBook. So just again, the steps are fairly easy then. it is, and let's just walk through them. So the app says, hey, would you want me to have access to your photos? Yes, I would. The app then sends the user to VivBook's auth server and says, Viv would like us to have access to his photos or his resources. The auth server lets Viv log in and then prompts him for a username and a password, and then says, hey, are you okay with the Viv Green's app having access to your photos and your resources? Viv says yes. Of course, if he says no at that point, nothing happens. Viv says yes, and a token is sent to the app. The app can then, of course, share that token with its own backend if it wants. Then every time Viv instructs Viv Greens to print photos, Viv Greens can reach out to the auth server at VivBook using that same token and say, hey, look, we've already been pre-authenticated. Viv gave us permission to do this. They inspect the token and go, yeah, you're right, you do have access, and grant them access to the resources, and then ultimately, of course, the photos can be transferred for printing. So this world is a great world where you know, if Viv decides, hey, I've sort of had enough of these guys with their service. Viv Green's service really sucks, and I don't want them anymore. You can go into the VivBook auth server and cut the communication. So at that point, these parts completely fall away. So let's call it, he revokes the token access, or revokes access for that app. So at that point, you know, Viv Greens can send the token, but the server is going to say no. So the important part about this whole message, though, is that there's one very important thing for Viv in this, and that is that this server over here, this auth server, where Viv brought all the stuff, or all the did his authentication and where his token was generated, that's sort of a one-stop shop for him for managing everything to do with his resource over here. So VivBook has really become a very important part for Viv, because this is where he stores his photos, and everybody who wants access to those photos have to go through this process to get there. But Viv has full rights to discontinue people he doesn't want to have give access anymore, or anything like that, and he is in full control just because he has a relationship over here, and he has a username and a password, and he has an identity over here. He can control those things. So that's basically OAuth 2 in the standard sense of applications and how they use it. So if you look at that, though, it's very complicated. You know, it's not complicated, but it's pretty complicated if you want, you know, all you want is go back to what we originally had, and originally what we had was really just Viv wanting access to your backend service over here. You know, that's all he wants to do, and he provides a username and password. So that's all you really want. You don't care about all of this other stuff. So, and that's where this thing comes in, called, or the thing that is called OAuth 2 Implicit. That's where OAuth 2 Implicit starts playing a role. So let's talk a little bit about OAuth 2 Implicit. Okay, so OAuth 2 Implicit really says, well, let's simplify things a little bit. Here's your server, but you have a authorization server in front of it, or authentication, but of course you'll see in my demo it's actually one and the same thing in my case. But there's the concept of this authorization server in front of your service. So in this case, what you're going to do is the following steps. The client, which in this case is you stroke the application you're writing, anything to that effect, you or your application sends in a authorization grant or a request with a username and password. So that's how it normally works. You do that today, so you send in this username and password, but instead of giving you access to a resource, the actual service at the back, it's going to issue you what's known as a refresh token. Okay, so a refresh token is a token you can use to generate other tokens. So that's your first step, is you ask the authorization server, which we're going to set up, the server, we ask this server we send in a username and password once, we get a token, a refresh token back, but let's say this refresh token is valid for 90 days. So it has a validity of 90 days. Let's just draw it this way, so there's a bit more space. Okay, so it gives you a refresh token back, and it's valid for 90 days. With this refresh token, you can generate as many access tokens as you like. Now, the next step then is your application goes to the same server and provides it the refresh token. And of course, if a server deems your refresh token still to be valid, it hasn't expired, it hasn't been 90 days yet, it says, oh, okay, I will, this is sort of the second leg of it. So, oh, okay, I see your token. I will issue you what's known as a access token. So it goes ahead and says, here's a token. Now, an access token is yet another token, but this is a much smaller lifespan. Let's just call this for 10 seconds or 24 hours or whatever you deem as good, but you get back a access token. So with the access token, though, you can now actually do the transaction, and that is the actual part where you're doing the transaction. So okay, so just take that guy, you send it over here, and now suddenly you have access. So this still seems a little bit cumbersome. Oh, just one thing, of course, when these two servers, when the access token arrives here, this server can check with this server that it's actually a valid token, sort of. So they have a little intercommunication over there, or they share maybe a LDAP or a database or something to that effect. So how this then works is, so what's so great about this? I mean, there's still a lot of work here, So the good thing about this is, first of all, the username and a password travel only once. This is typically, maybe this is a website where you go log in and you request access. So this can be fully controlled with full access, all sorts of the normal website, and you say, I want to start using your services or your RESTful or your backend services, and you apply for it, and they generate you a token, a refresh token or a master token, and send that back to you and say this token is valid for 90 days. So it's great for you over here, because in 90 days you can, this token will fall away and this guy has to come fetch a new token. So this red loop can continue, and let's call that the longer loop. You can force him to come back once every 90 days, once a month, once a year, once every 5 years, to come back and regenerate a refresh token. So that red loop happens over there, and that's good for compliance, because the guy has to come and refresh periodically. His password really expires after 90 days and he has to come refresh it. So that token then comes the blue loop. Every time he wants to do a transaction, we do the blue loop. So he sends in this refresh token, you check that it's still valid, and then you give him back a access token. Here I said access tokens 10 seconds. Maybe you want to say no, you can have access for 24 hours, or maybe for an hour, or whatever you deem fit here. But the good part about this blue loop is it doesn't contain your username and password. It contains a token that is replaced every 90 days. And the second is the response here. If you, for instance, do it every 10 seconds, is it keeps changing. Meaning, if somebody were to sit in the middle here, they can't really replay it that well. If they catch it, and the same down here, because this is a fast changing token and changes the whole time. This access token. So if we do every 10 seconds, so you go fetch the token, you get it, and you do your transaction, and you're done. But this, the green loop, then every time the request is different and it contains a new token. So if somebody captures your token, he has 10 seconds and then that token's not valid anymore. Then he has to go to the blue loop. If he compromises the blue loop, that will ultimately be replaced by the red loop. So there's many layers like this. It's not just a username and a password that's sent in and replaced. So a username and password that you can capture and use forever. It sort of replaces itself constantly in auth to implicit. So that's sort of a theory behind what we're going to try and build over here in this little OAuth 2 implicit service that we're going to put on our Spring framework.